Coming up, it's Fan Take Friday. We talk about the loss against the Phoenix Suns, the return of Dariq Whitehead, and a little something we like to call the B Squad. What will the post-deadline roster look like for the Nets? And is Killian Hayes in those plans? Oh, baby, let's dive in. Coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Arnbeck. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms, and let you know that from the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes NFL playoffs even more exciting right now. New customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. And Doug, oh, baby. We're going to talk about that Phoenix game. We all kind of knew where that result was headed. But there's a lot of things here on a Friday, Fan Take Friday, Casual Friday. Yours truly, just in a nice casual zip-up, ready to talk about all things Brooklyn Nets.
Oh, I forgot. Yeah, no shirt and tie today. That was breaks the streak, I think, a little bit, right? I think you had shirt and tie for like 3 straight weeks, something like that. So you break the streak. Nets do not break the streak of losing. On the other day against the Suns with old friend Kevin Durant returning into the mix. Nothing but nice things to say about Brooklyn too, which we could talk about a little bit before we get out of here. The Durant quotes around his time in Brooklyn were just, I don't know, pretty human, it sounded like, and mostly complimentary. But overall, that game against the Suns was pretty much as expected. I mean, when you throw out a starting lineup of Keon Johnson, Tyrese Martin, Jalen Wilson, Noah Clowney, and Nick Claxton, there's not a part of me that Kevin Durant, I don't think there's a part of Kevin Durant, that looks across the court and says, "Ooh, look, what am I missing? Like, look what I'm missing over here." There's not, doesn't feel like there'd be even with the Suns' struggles, doesn't feel like there's a lot of regret from him when he looks around and says, "Well, we're just gonna toast these guys by 24 before this all said and done."
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's a 108-84, the final score there. And you get into the quotes now because originally, forces beyond, well beyond, might I just add, our control prevented us from being in here for the post game yesterday when we were going to talk about this game in a little bit more in depth. But now there's a few other things that we want to cover before we hit the weekend. Nets only had 2 games this week. So when they wedge back to back together, it really opens up the floor for a little more wide-ranging conversation. So just on Durant, because I don't know if fans associate this the same way. And depending on where you go, when you're on, say, X as the example, that's a bit of a dark timeline when it comes to former players, right? We saw the way people reacted to Mikal Bridges and whether or not they're going to give him a video and, the debate around a thank you for all the picks, or what are we thanking him for? This guy did nothing to help our franchise. When it comes to Kevin Durant, I always try to assume that players are being genuine, or you try to look at, the videotape and say, it just looked like he was being honest. And what does Kevin Durant have as far as a reason to be dishonest? He sat there in his locker and just talked about it being a good time, a good experience, and a surprising one in some ways, because he wasn't sure how he would feel playing in a city, playing in Brooklyn.
Yeah, he had a bunch of good quotes, and I'm just pulling the last one up here. So the first one was asked about just like his overall time in Brooklyn, and he said it was the most fun I had in a long time playing ball. I'll tell you that. I just really enjoyed myself regardless of the chaos that was going around. I had a great time suiting up and putting on for the fans in the borough of Brooklyn. So I think that's like a pretty sort of like politician-y answer, although could have just said other stuff, and we've seen other players not hold back in circumstances like this. It's
Jimmy
it's
Butler
free to
might
say,
not have the same type of comments when he gets to his next team as far as how he reflects on his
you wouldn't
time
think
in
so.
Miami.
You wouldn't think so. But and look, a lot of these guys are superstars because people drag superstars a lot because of this stuff, but it's like because of this like sort of overly competitive mindset, or this like sort of like I wouldn't call it aggressive, but sort of like rubbing against the grain attitude around certain things. But I think that people sometimes forget too that like it's like that kind of same attitude that drives them to like be at the very top also, right? Like it's like you usually can't have one without the other. There's lots of people that are good at basketball.
Yeah.
There's very few people that reach this top. When you get to this place, it's usually because your attitude is like so driven that you become sort of standoffish to some degree. I think that like I rarely begrudge players like for stuff like that, because I feel like it's part of the deal. Like it's part of the deal. Like that's what's got you there. It's what makes you have an internal monologue.
Like dismissive.
Well, you just have an inner monologue where everyone's where everyone's a villain. Like you have to villainize everything because that's what drives you to get up in the morning because you're better than everybody. Like, so like the only way you can like sort of like continue on competitively is to like make everyone a villain. I don't think Durant's totally like this, but anyway, moving on. So a couple other quotes he had talking about like sort of like what happened in like sort of like where it all came undone. He said injuries and COVID, us not getting on the court. I think those two were biggest factors. I think a lot of people would like to say our attitudes, our personalities didn't mesh well. There are a lot of narratives going around about each individual player, about our mentality as men. But once we got on the court and we actually played together, you saw the culture we were building. It was something the fans could get behind. And then these goes to the first year when James got there hard halfway through the season. That was the most incredible basketball I've seen and played in. And then what undid it was injuries to me, James and Kyrie, and then along with COVID. And that just confused a lot of S curse. So, yeah, I mean, that's like pretty, wide ranging view. I don't want to get the tag here.
No, I know. I just don't know why. I've never heard S curse as explicit. Whatever people S curse.
Oh, I love saying curse because it just like it totally nerfs the word too. Like it's just like it's a B curse.
It does. Yeah. Fantastic.
Anyway, so what do you think when you hear that? We could probably move on from Durant after this, but you think it's like, do you think like his view of like sort of what happened is correct, or does he like? Do you think he conveniently leaves stuff out? Like I don't know. What's your? I can give 2 seconds of thought on it, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. When it comes to him, because again, like you could ask James Harden what his experience was in Brooklyn. You could ask Kyrie Irving, right? And you get these different versions of it. From Kevin Durant's standpoint, I think that he probably is the closest to actually encapsulating it for what it really was, right? You get there are injuries. The COVID situation absolutely creates this total chaos that nobody anticipates coming. And that little thing about, and then James gets there halfway through the year. And we talked about it back then. We were like, oh my God, this offensive basketball is absolutely insane. This team will be unstoppable if they can just be healthy. If they can, and that never came to fruition. And oddly enough, even though through all that stuff, it's like when you get down to the Milwaukee Bucks series, remember that James Harden, he coming into that in that playoff run, it was Kyrie and him both out, injuries back and forth. Kyrie gets stepped on by Giannis. Like all that stuff happens there. So even with everything else that happened beyond that, if you just got that one playoff run, if that had just been clean from a health standpoint, we might be having a very different conversation where Kevin Durant is saying, for all the chaos and everything that went wrong there, we made it to the finals. I won't even say that we won the championship, but like we made it to the finals. We took Brooklyn, we took the Nets organization to a place they hadn't been since the Jason Kidd era, right? So that's how close, the toe on the line, that's how close you could be to having a very different conversation, even for all the chaos that comes out of it. So a good game for Kevin Durant, just as everybody knows, puts up 24 points in this one pretty casually across 30 minutes, 8 of 15, 4-7 from 3, 8 rebounds. But just to read his box score is like, oh, that's right. That's what superstars do on a night in, night out basis. Coming up here in a second. Yeah. Move beyond the Phoenix Suns game. Oh, you want to jump in, Doug? Feel free.
No. I think you covered it pretty well. I think that it was just that. One final thing on this, I think we are going to move on from Durant, is that like I don't even put him in the same category as Harden and Kyrie. One, he did a massive favor by signing the extension early. Like he signed that extension and that enabled the Nets rebuild. If he had not signed that extension, they would have been totally screwed. They would not have been able to trade him for the same amount that they signed, that they traded, getting from the Suns. And he pushed past further than all those other guys sort of in requesting the trades too. Well, he requested the trade early, then stuck it out. Yeah, he requested early, stuck it out, and I just don't put him in the same class as the other two guys. And maybe that's just an attitude and sort of a thing. But anyway, okay, we'll move on. We're going to talk a little Dariq Whitehead. We'll talk about what's happening a little in Long Island. We'll talk about some of these other guys that might be coming back in trades as like the trade talks continue to expand. We'll talk about that all here in a moment. First, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Look, from the first whistle to the final drive, there's nothing better than getting over on FanDuel. This makes the NFL playoffs even more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets. If you win your first bet, that's $300 to keep the action going. So much action going over on FanDuel with conference championships this week. Couple of great games. You're not just betting on the games either. You're not just looking at the over-unders. You're not just looking at the lines. Player props. Start now over on FanDuel with the player props. See if you get done by Sunday afternoon when the game starts. That's just how much is going on. App's super easy to navigate. Variety of bets keeps every game exciting. When you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team, just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. Visit FanDuel.com to to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sports partner of the NFL.
All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about the Phoenix Suns game, talking about now being 2-16 in their last 18 games. I put this out over on X too, by the way. We're going to talk about Dariq Whitehead and a little talk about Killian Hayes in the G League, maybe some shifting winds around the Cam Johnson trade discussions and what maybe the Nets are willing to do. But I did put, I had posted the 2-17 record, and there's only, I think the Wizards are the only team that have matched that over the course of this as well in that 17 game stretch. And it's funny to think about how a couple other teams are winning a few games here. And when you look back and just see, over the last 20 games, the Nets won 3 and 3 or 4 other teams near the bottom won 4 or 5. You're like, well, yeah, that can actually, those two couple of games there, if we just repeat this process for another 20 games, that can get us up to the 4th. Maybe it can help us push towards the 3rd. It is some, that idea of just how quickly you can go from one too many games in the beginning of the year and what it all means. I know we talked about this a little bit yesterday, but it was just funny to go kind of suss out the numbers and say, like, it doesn't take a lot. It doesn't take a lot when you're losing this many games. And in that Phoenix one, when you sit down again, Cam Johnson, after he's just coming back, a little bit of the ankle tweak, still haven't seen, obviously, Thomas, D'Lo nursing that hamstring. It's like the manipulation part of this is very easy to do. And when you do it, you get an opportunity like with Dariq Whitehead against the Phoenix Suns. Listen, this is a guy that you and I, unfortunately, begrudgingly have said this is going to be a long journey and we don't know if he ever gets there. But when you show up in a game that doesn't matter and you play 15 minutes and you go 4 of 7, 3 of 5 from beyond the arc, something that has looked atrocious when we've watched him at the NBA level, when we watched him in Summer League, and get 12 points in those 15 minutes, like, it's something worth mentioning here when this team thinks about the young core and what they're going to try to build going forward. Dariq needs to make some momentum here before the Nets start bringing in draft picks and it becomes a really crowded room.
Yeah, real quick before Dariq, I agree with you on your assessment of like where they are in the standings. One thing I'm realizing, I actually had this thought last night too, so I wonder if we were just sort of mind melding this, because I was looking at this and I was like, I've been so focused on the wins that I just kind of had lost track of the part where they just played more games than some of these other teams. And the loss column difference was only 1 or 2 between a lot of these games. So that was like kind of my bad for just kind of having my eyes glance too easily at the wins and be like, oh, they're 3-4 games up on the win column, but they're only 1 game, 2 games up in the loss or back in the loss column, however you want to phrase that. So yeah, I think that, and by the way, keep throwing out lineups like they threw out against the Suns, and no problem. No problem there. A couple other like little caveats here, like Brandon Miller lost for the season for the Hornets. That's definitely going to sink anything that they had about like sort of pushing forward. But Toronto's kind of won a couple games in a row, so I think we're still going to see some movement. Pelicans have won 4 games in a row. I think that's. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that we're going to see this continue to slide.
And by the way, sorry, the Philadelphia, who's like, we're like, oh, they're going to get back on track. Well, they're not going to get back on track.
They're not going to.
So what Philadelphia does here actually does become interesting, because they're going to keep themselves in this conversation around the middle to bottom of this pack here. I
think, too, they have like a pick they have to like convey to the Thunder. Yeah. Like they're in a really weird spot. Yep. Like they're like in a Nets kind of spot where it's like, well, I don't think they can really tank. I got to see where the protections are in that. I know there are protections, but right now it conveys to OKC. Anyway, moving on. Dariq Whitehead, really nice to see that performance the other night. It's only 15 minutes. It's, 7 shots total. He hits the threes. He looked very comfortable there. He had the Euro step over Plumlee for the and 1, which you're like, oh, that's pretty nice. Like an in transition Euro step to finish and 1 over a big guy. And you're like, kind of see glimmers of it. If you take a look at his sort of season as a whole, it's really not been that promising. Like, we've long said that to really make it in the NBA, you have to crush the G League. Right? Like you have to, your G League number. And by the way, even if you crush the G League, it doesn't mean you're going to crush the NBA. But guys who can't really dial it all the way up in the G League don't tend to get into the NBA and go nuts, right? He has not like been great. Like the efficiency and stuff at the G League over 15 games has been, just bad, frankly. 35% from 35% from the field, which is horrible, and 29% from 3, which is also bad. So I guess I was definitely excited to see it, and he looked comfortable. I still always go back to like the larger sample size to say like what's the real story here. And
Yeah.
I know sounds like just like, glass all the way empty instead of just half full and be excited about the performance. It's great. I'm glad he's been shuttled around a lot between getting back up to the main team and then just sitting. Like he's done a lot of that this year where he's been up with the main squad and just sat the whole time. But the times where he has been in Long Island has just not been very good. So still cautiously optimistic about him long term, and pumped to see that 15 minutes stretch. Really, I mean, the first like 7 minutes he was on the court was the real story. But overall, I always just have to look and be like, hey, let's, what have the other 200 and 300 minutes look like? And those minutes have been bad. And so I think it's just kind of where we are. Still super young, so not really worried about it. But I think we're still very much in the long game. I'm not like, hey, 15 minutes of Dariq Whitehead, he should start now. I don't think that there's like a strong case for that.
No. But, and it's funny too, because of the way the Nets are set up and we know, and all the picks and everything, it's, you can actually look at the Nets roster and see the Keon Johnsons of the world and these other former first round picks that are now on the Nets roster and getting an opportunity, maybe showing that they can have a larger role in the NBA because they couldn't crack good teams and good rosters other places. Now, Dariq Whitehead is playing on a roster that doesn't have a lot of good talent, but the injuries and everything else, I can very easily see him being a guy that you see somewhere else. And I don't mean that he's all of a sudden going to blossom, but that you see him kind of bubble up and get some run, maybe on a bad team next year, 2 years from now, whatever it may be. And you go, right, remember, he's a former first-round pick. The pedigree was there, but the Brooklyn Nets drafted 4 first-round picks in 2025, and then they drafted a few more the next year, and the roster just filled out, and the team ends up going in a very different direction than where they were when they had drafted you and the optimism of what you could develop into. So hopefully it works out for him. It's good to see him do a little something at the NBA level, because so far there hasn't been really anything to get excited about in that regard. But it is also a sobering reminder when you go and look at those numbers in the G League. And it's just, when you are getting a little bit more run and between the whatever the tip-off tournament is in the regular season in Long Island, the minutes, okay, you're playing big minutes, and the percentages just aren't there. And as you said, if you can't dominate at that level, it's really hard to get optimistic about the NBA level. But it is what it is, and we continue to be hopeful, I think, because he went through injuries, and maybe also because he came in the same draft class. When you look, you saw Noah Clowney, and you know what he's going to be for them, and it looks like he's on the right track. The Nets have done a good job finding these players, so maybe they have a runway for him that we just, we don't think about it the same way as when they drafted and they said, 3 years from now, we'll see where he's at 3 years from now, and there really is no pressure. And the last note I will just say, not to be long-winded, is that even though he's not playing at the NBA level right now, I have liked that he's been up and just sat, because if I want to give credit somewhere, it's that Jordy Fernandez and the coaching staff are saying, hey, just be up here and kind of watch, just see some of the veteran guys play. Like that can be a good learning process. You're going to need to get on the court. You're going to need to get run, but maybe you can see things and talk with players at the NBA level and learn a little bit that way, if it's just coming down to technique, approach, reading defenses, etc. So coming up here in a second, we hope for Dariq Whitehead's success. But coming up here in a second, we'll also talk about Killian Hayes and his success and the clamoring that former friend of the show, still friend of the show, former coverage of Killian Hayes, Koo from Locked On Pistons, is desperate to see this man back at the NBA level, plus the shifting winds when it comes to the trade deadline for Brooklyn. We'll get into that here to close things out in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, I'll tell you about our friends over at Talkspace Therapy. It's a game changer. Help you manage stress, improve sleep, communicate more effectively, but finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be a challenge. That's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace is the leading virtual therapy provider. It makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is super simple. You just match with a licensed therapist, fit your needs usually within 48 hours. That's less than 2 days for all you math nerds out there. It's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans. For most insured members, it's a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize mental health. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNBA and enter promo code SPACE80. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNBA and enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnNBA, promo code SPACE80.
All right, so to tie a pretty little bow on today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about the Suns game, the losses, where they are in the standings, the Dariq Whiteheads of the world, and then the Killian Hayes, man, because I'll tell you, nobody, and I've had messages with Koo as well, the host of Locked On Pistons, and he does a great job covering that team through all the dark days and now gets some of the success. But the amount of times that I've been messaged by Koo or publicly tagged in a post about Killian Hayes, where he's like, when are they calling him up? Because he wants, in the same way we just talked about Dariq Whitehead, he wants to see Killian Hayes have success in his career, right? Like, you root for these young players. So the Nets come off this game where a bunch of guys are scoring double-doubles, and Killian Hayes is the poster image for it. And I saw this great debate just unravel with fans of, oh, come on, he's ready, let him cook. And then, I don't know who it was, but the credit given here where they go, yeah, he's fixed, shooting 43% and 30 from deep at the G League level. Like, what? One great game, one outburst. His numbers, his free throw shooting numbers, like everything is exactly where it is at the NBA level or slightly lower. And you talk about this with Dariq Whitehead, we talk about this with other guys. If you can't dominate at that level of the game, then it's going to be hard to get you back up to the NBA level. Now, he's always been a pretty good facilitator, setting other guys up. But do you see this as any indication of like, hey, maybe something is working here? Because I did think post-deadline that Hayes would be up for the Nets, and they would just give him a run just to see what they have in him and no reason to be worried about it. Is that still on the table, you think, for them?
It's on the table because they're going to probably need bodies. Is it like, but is there like any reason to call him up now? Because like he's, again, crushing Long Island. I mean, no, like you make a great point. Those numbers are nearly exactly the same. Like, I mean, down to the percentage. I don't look this up real quick, but like it's super inefficient. It's all the reasons that Detroit basically let him go, which was he can't shoot. I mean, it really is down to the percentage. Like, so he's a 41%. So I'll go for last year. It's just to say based on growth, 41% from the field for his career, 41% from the field his last year in Detroit, 43% this year. From three last year, 29.7%. From three this year, 30.6. So less than a percentage point off. And then from the free throw line last year, 66%. And the free throw line, 66%. It's like exactly the same. He's like two ticks above in field goal percentage, which is still bad, right? Like, it's not like he went from, 48% to 50%. Like, he went from, bad to still bad. And then all the other stuff, he just can't hit threes and he can't hit free throws. And you just can't be a guard in the NBA when you can't do those things. It's kind of just step one. Like, if you tell me a high level guard in the NBA, besides maybe like Russ, who can't shoot threes very well. And Russ does like everything else at like 1,000% velocity. And that's kind of made his bones on that his whole career. And so Westbrook, I mean, if it just in case that's not clear. So, are there a lot of other guards out there that just can't do this at all? And there just really aren't. And so and some, it's like, okay, well, maybe they're just getting by at like 35% or something like that. And they play insane defense, but he's just not even that. And so I just don't know where you can really get excited about what we've seen. It's just, there's been no, and frankly, last point on this, like the numbers are out. The numbers, the efficiency is the same, with the competition being 25% worse or whatever. So that's even more, that's more damning.
Remember,
that's even more damning because it's like, we're comparing his G League numbers to his NBA numbers, but you really shouldn't do. That's not a one-to-one transference of talent, right? It should be considerably higher. It's the fact that it's worse in some areas or the same means it's just worse.
If he was shooting, and I'll leave it here because I do want to get into this shift maybe in deadline chatter that we're hearing a little bit about the Brooklyn Nets. If he was shooting 40, even 46, 47% from the field, and even 33% from beyond the arc, these numbers wouldn't be great, but you'd say, okay, but there's improvement here. It means that you are excelling against lesser competition. Likewise with any other category. I mean, the free throw shooting thing, I think sometimes we wait for this on guys, or we say like, oh, if they can just improve the free throw shooting, or fans are always frustrated. Nicholas Claxton can't hit more than 50% from the line. And we always go, well, if he can just clean that up. Yeah, well, but also just look at the numbers. Guys that hit about their percentage from the line, that's what they hit. And sometimes that really just stretches across the board. It takes a lot. You need a lot already instilled and set there from a shooting standpoint, mechanics, to say, yes, over 2-3 seasons as a young player in the NBA, you'll grow and evolve into that shot. Hayes didn't come in necessarily. Was better, at least a little bit more at the college level, and then it fell off when he got to the NBA. But he hasn't been able to seem to get back to it, right?
Well, yeah, he was in Europe. He was in college. But
Sorry,
one more
Europe,
thing about that. One more thing, it's even more concerning. Like he started off his first season as an 82% free throw shooter, and 77, then 82%, and now it's which speaks to me is like it's mental and mechanics. Like when you have a drop off like that, when you were good at it, like 80 plus percent, and now all of a sudden you can't anymore, and now you're 2 straight years of 66% from the line, which is when you're just standing there by yourself with your own thoughts and your mechanics, right? Like that's there's no one's running at you, no one's closing you out in a free throw. So that to me, as someone who has had the yips before, like that, this is that's what 100% it is to me. It's like it's a mental and mechanics thing, because this is the part where that's the only factor, right? And if you just have an insanely bad drop off from one year to the next, probably in the idea of like, hey, I'm trying to improve my 3-point shooting, so I changed some stuff, and now I'm thinking a lot about it because I know I need to hit these shots to win in the NBA, and now I can't shoot at the free throw line either. And I don't know. I'm not trying to like make a mental case for him because I know that's like pretty unfair. I don't really know. I'm just saying that when you see, it could be a variety of factors. If I were to bet on something, it would be something like that, because it's just this very static stat that most players are just the same at, unless there's some kind of change in like the way they're thinking about it or the way they're shooting it. And it's just super concerning.
The physical ability, usually you feel like you check that box for every NBA player, right? And then it's, well, what else could it be beyond that if you see a clear change in something? We'll get more
for that one. For this one
we'll probably
stat.
be talking about this.
For this one stat.
Only on the free throw shooting.
Yes.
I want to get into, we'll get into this more next week. And who knows, maybe go to the deadline, see how it comes out of the other side of it. The only last, I did want to mention this today, and we'll probably talk about it more next week as well. And that's just, there was also this part that was coming out about, well, the Kings maybe want to be in on Cam Johnson, and some speculation that the Nets are now willing, or indicating they're willing to maybe take on money when it comes to contracts coming back in the door. Something said, oh, they don't want any money beyond this year. They want to be very clean. Now, I'll just say quickly, like, I never totally understood the not wanting to take money back. I get the reason why you want to make sure you have all the options on the table, but the Nets are going to have no money on the books next year. So they could afford, in this instance, when they talked a little bit about, well, if the Kings wanted Cam Johnson, Kevin Huerter for the money matching, and then they brought up Carter as being the enticing piece and 1 first-round pick. And you can debate in the weeds about if that's enough. If you like that deal, you don't like that deal, that's fine. But just on the Kevin Huerter, it's like, oh, that contract, you never could. He's on the books next year for $18 million effectively. Like, okay, you're gonna need money on the books. He's a guy that can shoots the 3 ball. He does some thing, whatever. I don't care about Kevin Huerter, the player, the talent, and what it looks like going forward. But if the idea was that there was a better trade option for the Brooklyn Nets, and it involved taking some money beyond this season, I'm almost surprised that this wasn't kind of an understood thing that the Nets would be willing to explore, because we know what their cap looks like beyond this season. It's going to be Nicholas Claxton, and if they choose to play Cam Thomas, and then the rookie class they bring in, that's it. Like, that's the books. They're going to have plenty of money to play with and to push around. And frankly, Kevin Huerter might be a guy that you have a discussion about next trade deadline, saying, oh, does somebody want to maybe grab a guy that can knock down a perimeter shot and add to their roster? I think he has like reclamation kind of vibes about it. And there's probably a lot of names like this that you could put on the list around the league when you have these talks.
Yeah, I mean, they have $59 million on the books now, and that's with the Cam Johnson contract, right? And now you assume you're going to get an extension for Cam Thomas. Maybe we get an extension from Daron Sharp. I think it doesn't feel like any signs are pointing right now that the Cam Thomas number is going to be massive, right? Like, he's been hurt. I just think there's no buzz around that at all. I think they're probably, I mean, we'll see. And they've been wrong about Cam Thomas every step of the way here. So I not want to guess what the number's going to be. But even if it's big, which I don't even think it's going to be, there's still nothing on the books. So, and they're going to tank next year. And like, they're going to tank next year because they have their own draft pick, and Herter's on for like, well, the Huerter contract for like having money on the books for next year. Now, if it's more years, if it's like 2 years from now, that's different, because like maybe their prospects have changed at that point. But for next year, I don't think there's any reason to let that stop what they're trying to do. They're not trading for some superstar next year. They're going to try to go for one of the boozer guys or whoever at the top of the draft next year. And so I just don't think that's going to be, I don't think that'll stop. I think it's a nice thing to say because they don't want to take players back. I would always say it, but I don't think in practice. I don't think in practice we'll see it. Okay, we're gonna get out of here. Like I said, Fan Take Friday, a bunch of different stuff going on here on Friday. Make sure that you are subscribed over on YouTube. Look, get in those YouTube comments, leave questions, stuff. This stuff comes up on the show, right? Like the comments, the stuff, the Twitter, it all ends up coming up on the show. So make sure you're commenting. Make sure you follow us at Adam Armbrecht, at Doug Norrie over on Twitter as well.
Swag is consistency, and that is one Alvin Kamara.
Oh, okay. It's funny about these quotes because sometimes
he's a man of few words, so he's to the point. I can only represent the great poets in their own words. I can't add to their words, so I had to leave it.
Funny with quotes like that, because I would have bet my life that was a Kevin Durant quote. As like maybe to bookend the show, but you went different sport, different city. Nothing to do with that. Yeah,
not even remotely tethered to the content that we've talked about. No, not even close. Yeah.
Interesting. We'll talk about that. Okay. But in the meantime, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back next week talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball. Basketball.
Incredibly consistent and connected. Basketball. Yeah.